Okay. Oh, no, please. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't see you, but you can see me. Hi, James. Across the pond, huh? So there's so much to say, and I feel that in the times that we are living, specifically, there needs to be a reconciliation within ourselves of what goes on in the world as we're presently experiencing it. And so for that reason, I thought of a story from the Hasidic tradition. Since we just completed the Jewish New Year, Hoshana Tova, everyone. Happy New Year. And the story is told of the rabbi sitting with a couple of his pupils. And he said to them, "So tell me, how does one tell the difference when the day is about to rise, the night is coming to an end, and one, however, has that perception of a new day dawning?" And one pupil said, "Oh, I know. When the night is coming to an end and the day is about to begin, one can see the difference in the distance between an animal such as a sheep and a dog." The rabbi said, "No." The other pupil raised his hand and said, "Perhaps you can tell when night is ending and day is about to begin, when in the distance you can see the difference between a fig tree and a peach tree." And the rabbi said, "No, you can determine that day is dawning and the night is ending when you can look at your man or a woman, whoever they may be, and see them as your brother or sister. And until you can look at them through those eyes, it is still night." And I think it's symbolic of the times that we are living in. I had assigned myself a task last week at the second debate that I would do my... Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I mean. So I determined this is a spiritual practice. You know, we speak about all newsletter and news headlines and atrocities and all of the things that the media, social and tangible, would have us see are a call for prayer. Implement this technique called spiritual mind treatment. It's a phenomenal gift that we've all been given as divine grace in action. So I thought, okay, I've got a choice. I don't have to watch. I can absolutely disassociate myself and be done with it. Or I can see where I go within myself when life circumstances and the people, places, and things about me aren't particularly to my liking. So I thought, this is my spiritual practice. This is my discipline. And I know myself enough to know, particularly being a parent, that way that I could look at my kids when they were acting up, didn't have to say a word, but that look of derision and annoyance and fear of impending punishment, they would get it loud and clear. So I reminded myself, and no facial expressions, you know, conning yourself into thinking, well, because I'm not saying anything, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm centered with that perfect, absolute, pure, first and foremost principle of life. So I sat down, and there's an immediacy with which an emotion is aroused when we already have a preconceived idea and perception about that person, that place, and that thing. Have you noticed? And so I thought, okay, mute the TV, and know there is one life. Let's say that together. There is one life. That life is God. That life is God. That life is perfect, whole, and complete. That life is perfect, whole, and complete. That life is my life now. That life is my life now, and the life of everything and everyone. Life is, and everyone. Ernest wouldn't mind that we kind of tag that along. And so I found myself through the experience on and off that center of being. And I consider that the challenge of our lifetime, that every moment that we're presently experiencing personally and collectively is a teaching moment. And it's a moment where perhaps we're looking at the dark night of the soul, just as you're all anticipating a completely new experience for yourselves as change is emerging. And the dark night of the soul is that place, as has been reported throughout millennia, that we are leaving as we know it a certain identity, a certain perception, a certain way of life, and yet it is not quite apparent what is emerging, what is the form of it, what does it look like, what's it going to feel like, who's going to show up, will new people come, will old people go? And so there's this immersion of ourselves already in an atmosphere of thought, of feeling, of perception, of memory, of experiences, not just our own, but what Holmes referred to as that collective race mind. How do you guys do this, not being able to see faces? That would just drive me crazy. But I have the tool. There is one life, that life is God. So do I have to see something visibly, tangibly, in order to know the perfection of it? I'll leave that one in the crossbar there. So, as I witness myself, I know that I am not alone in the human experience of what I do, where I go, when life and all the circumstantial evidence of life around me is not cooperative to what I perceive or would deem to be acceptable or just or fair or right or good. And yet I know that it is a moment of pregnant opportunity where the gestation is really occurring on the part of all of us who have had whatever degree of exposure we've had to spiritual principles and specifically to the science of mind. But 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years ago, you could be surprised at saying, oh, I read that book too, or oh, I heard that speaker, and it would all correspond to this new awakening to a spiritual reality that includes and yet transcends the human condition. And yet, we've all been there, done that already. So I feel divine grace is activating the quality of our own inherent perfection and creativity and patience and compassion and wisdom, and utilizing that to contribute to a betterment of all humanity, that which is close in, and yet knowing that we're all in that one mind, that universal mind. Therefore, what I know in mind, in truth, right here, it transcends time and space. Whoever is of a mind to and receptive to a higher way of living, and I believe that encompasses the masses. Who doesn't want something better than the way it presently exists? So therefore, in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq, in Palestine, in all the places that have been affected by Matthew, by the hurricanes, and by the volcanic eruptions internally that have to manifest, there is a certainty and a calming effect when I can train myself to at least be seated in front of a television with the impersonality of a picture showing up, and in the midst of that, maintain my inner sense of calm and cohesive connection to the presence of the divine. So I have discovered a unique way for me to come out of myself and at the same time to connect with people in a way that has the spiritual component at its very core. And I've chosen to do that through my Facebook page. And what has happened is, about 3 months ago, I have, of course, a few more than ample opportunities at many Starbucks in my area out in Thousand Oaks. And I chose one because they have a lot of seating outside. And so I would sit, and I did the treatment to know that somehow, in the wondrous ways that divine grace working through my consciousness of oneness with the divine finds a way to connect with people, and in that which seems to be physical, emotional, mental, there's a spiritual lesson that I can be utilizing Facebook for to convey. And sure enough, that very first day, someone showed up. And also, you know, it's easy for me to be here, particularly when I can't see you. I can say anything. Because I don't get to see your facial expression of shock, or approval or disapproval. So I treat it that I know that everything about my life, whether I was doing ministry in Canada, in Edmonton, which was my first ministry in 1985, or when I came back and did an interim in Honolulu, oh, that was such a hard gig. And ultimately, when I came to Westlake in 1996, it's always been about maintaining, sustaining, and building upon an expanded version of myself, so that when I left Westlake as a full-time minister in 2009, it was with the same commitment of simply changing the picture of what ministry would be, but I knew it would always be that which my life is about. I know it, my kids know it, my grandkids know it, and I don't need anyone's agreement on that one. That's a choice that I stand by without apology or without exception. And so that's been the privilege of working with many centers in many ways, just as I'm here with you today. So I thought to myself, the ministry now continues. I develop a Starbucks ministry by citing people and invoking conversation, which in a social situation isn't always easy. So it first started when I noticed, of course, everybody on their gadgets, sometimes 2 and 3 gadgets at a time. And I noticed something else, that while people would be sitting and working their technology, their feet would, you know that way you sit, but your foot kind of shakes, you're moving your foot? Everybody was doing it. It was like a lineup, you know, like chorus line of shaking legs. So people came and people went, but the guy next to me was the only one left. So I took a deep breath. God speaks through and by means of me, and finally I said to him, I said, may I ask you a question? And he said, sure. I said, why do you shake your leg? Besides, maybe someone once told him, go shake a leg. I don't know. So he thought for a moment, didn't answer immediately, and he thought, well, to tell you the truth, you know, you can see I've got a lot going on. I'm on my iPhone, and I've got my iPad open, and I'm hooked up for a conversation on Skype. He said, what I find is when I'm accelerating mentally, and I've got a lot going on within me and within my world, it's almost an automatic response that my body has to also be in movement. A very considered notice of being observant of what goes on. That became my first sighting about the commonality that he then came on to really point out the whole relevance of the situation. He said, and what I find is when I meditate in the morning and do my own practice, I'm not as inclined to be as agitated or activated by the circumstances, by the things outside me. And that became the start of the most incredible experience that I would ever have imagined. And so the thing is very, very fascinating to me how there is one mind, and divine grace is simply an opportunity to activate that dormant potential that exists within all of us for love, for grace, for the intelligence with which to respond from connection and then extend that outward. But always I live from the inside out. We know that. We know it intellectually. But the trick, the teaching moments that we're offered every moment of every day is how do I express that? How do I personify that? How am I a role model so that whoever made that statement, so that I, when others are losing their heads, can still retain the mastery of my own inner world. That's what we're here to do, all of us, and particularly in today's climate and environment, politically, economically, globally, personally, environmentally, in every way. If not now, again, borrowing from the Judaic tradition, if not now, when? If not me, who? And if I am only for me, of what use am I, really? And so for me, divine grace is becoming more and more activating that dormant quality, be it of a listening ear or a kind word of encouragement, or the wisdom to simply be still and listen what it is that's gelling within me that becomes the catalyst for my action, rather than allowing circumstances to determine the way that I react. And so the grace with which I move is for me always the degree to which I am consciously aware of my oneness with the divine. And how do we get there? How do I continue to sustain this awareness of my oneness with the divine? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So let the one message that you really take into mind and heart and soul be that I do my meditation. To me, that is the primary foundation. People will say to me, well, I do that, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I take the dog for a walk, and I'm quiet. I'm out in the neighborhood, and it's beautiful, or I'm up in the mountains. Once a month, I meditate. Sorry, that doesn't fly. Because my sense is that after a night of sleep, that's a level of consciousness which in the morning, as we start to awake, we're in that mid-zone where I'm not quite asleep and I'm not quite awake. Isn't that just like a description of what's happening in your new move? That you're not quite gone from here yet, other than in mind you really are, but it isn't quite determined how that's all going to fit, how it's all going to look. That's our life, every moment. So that when I awake in the morning, before my personality or my ego sense of me tells me where I'm going to go and what I'm like and where I'll be that day, I harness the energy through my own conscious choice to be still and to do whatever that form of meditation is. That does not include music, no guided meditations on my spiritual prescription list, at least not at that first opening of the eyes. It's the immediacy with which I activate that dormant quality of grace, of creativity, of intelligence, of patience, of forgiveness. So much of the Jewish holidays that we just experienced have to do with inner introspection and a true meticulous inventory of how could I improve upon what happened this past year. And certainly, if we are all one in universal mind, then it's true. Everyone is my brother or sister. But if I can't watch a TV showing me somebody debating in a place that's not even geographically in the same vicinity than I am, or if I can still see the refugee crisis so seemingly far away and not see these are my brothers and sisters. That's how my dark night of the soul emerges as the light, which is true. I have no concept of time. So, what I'm going... Oh, okay, so what are we saying? We're saying divine grace is inherent to our nature. It is already an endowment divinely provided as part of this package. But that package abides as qualities of virtue and qualities of character that are high and noble and mighty, and yet very much practical and applicable to everyday living. That's what they're designed for. So if I'm already sitting steeped in the divine unconditional love, maybe as humans we should shoot for being less conditional. I don't know that I could wake up tomorrow morning and have that consciousness of the Christ or the Buddha that could say, aha, my judgment is gone. All the conditions I placed on giving myself freely and loving, willingly and forgiving, gently and completely, that's it. It's a done deal. So in the meantime, in the interim, in that gap between what is leaving and what is emerging, all of us are in that gap right here and right now. And the world is waiting to see what we who are dedicating our lives to spiritual truth and the development of our own nature of spirit more fully, the world is watching and waiting. So why don't we treat knowing that what is known right here and right now is known everywhere in mind, for we all live, move, and have our being in that mind. And so I treat in the absolute, in the I am, because the I am announces, every time we speak those two words, it announces the supremacy of that spiritual nature when recognized, how that creative law somehow responds to it and produces the forms that are equivalent. They're also the only two words you speak for yourselves, so when you hear them, these words are your personal statement of commitment to live and practice the presence of divine grace. So I go within to the very depth of my being, where God is, I am. This is the simplicity of the universal truth. Because God is life, love, truth, intelligence, I am life, truth, love, intelligence, being created in the spiritual image and likeness of the universal wholeness. And so I cultivate, I develop, I fine-tune all of the qualities inherent to my nature that represent God, spirit, mind, truth, the greater reality, for being all that I essentially and fundamentally am, and yet I am more willing to do what it takes through my spiritual practices, through my everyday living, teaching moments, so that I bring my gift of patience, of flexibility, of faith, of harmony, of oneness and unity. I bring these qualities of wholeness of being and totality of self to every encounter, to every experience that I am privileged and honored to express day by day in every way. I uncover the perfection that indwells me, rather than judging by appearances physically, financially, globally, economically. I immediately penetrate that maze of darkness and I tap into the very light of my soul, knowing from this point of conscious connection, I am inspired, I am encouraged, I am guided, guarded, impelled to take actions that are commensurate with the words of wholeness that I speak, the words of peace that I speak, the words of goodness that I speak, knowing that even in the midst of all that is occurring in my personal world or collectively, I know that good emerges, for my attention is riveted on the good, on the blessings, on that which brings forth the highest and the greatest for myself, for all humanity, near and far, here, there, and everywhere. I accept this, knowing my word, the word spoken right here and right now, is a law of enforcement of the truths declared that return as blessings, as healing, as transformation, and infinite good for one and for all. And so in acceptance and in gratitude, let us all together declare, and so it is.